know, for me as a person, like too much by the mystics don't like the analytical, like the mystical part. And the job, I think, when you do history right, is to make everybody uncomfortable. And when everyone's uncomfortable, we're getting somewhere. But when the scientists are comfortable telling their version of the story, and the mystics are comfortable telling their version,
Which I understand, like, one bears fruits in a way that is useful for everybody, right? The other is convenient to the story conception of the psychotic drowns in the same water the mystic swims in with delight. So how do you make sense of what is actually coherent mystical experiences and the writings and sayings that come from them, and discern between straight up hallucinations and psychosis versus people that seem to be touching a coherent, profound, transcendent reality that seem like they're kind of swimming in the same water, you know, but there is a difference.
Sure, and sometimes I guess it's not my job to judge, right? It's like I get to be like, I don't really know. Like, you know, was William Blake, like, was he crazy? Like, yeah, he could be crazy and true. Like, you know, like, it's not, you know, I question these kind of dichotomies that we build for ourselves, where, you know, at the end of the day, I look at some of these texts and say, is this the ravings of a mad person, or is this, you know, or what Lang said, that breakdowns are breakdowns, some breakdowns are breakthroughs. And my task is to look at the text with what I call sometimes a critical sympathy. Critical in the sense that I bring to bear all the tools that I have access to. And it's an admittedly small group of tools, honestly. Philosophy, logic, science. But I bring to bear all those tools, and my job is to go to the text, the mystical text, and say, this makes sense. That's my North Star. There's a reason this person wrote this because it made sense to them. My job is to get in their head as best I can and find where that sense making is happening. And you know, I was just working on a Gnostic text called the Ontology. We just don't know what's going on. It's so bewildering. And my job is to get into the text and say, no, it makes sense. So there's a me problem when there's no sense. You know, and so I throw everything I have at it. And at some point I'm gonna hit a wall and say, I just don't know what's happening in this text. But this is the best we got, right? And, you know, if I get to the text where it's completely just incoherent, then I with this material. And does that mean the text is incoherent? It might, but I should be humble about it. It might just be a me problem. Maybe this text was written for people initiated in mysteries.
Hello.
Where it was meant to be performative. It was read out loud in a sense in an analytical way. It's meant to induce a state. That's totally possible. And so the task at that point is to step back and say, okay, maybe it's like a koan, maybe it's meant to break consciousness. It's actually, they're intentionally writing it in a way that makes it so that your logical brain can't do it. So that's the task of a scholar. And anybody who goes to the history of Gnosticism or Hermeticism, and they bring to bear the tiny little skill set of logic, rationalism, empiricism, and they're just like, oh, it doesn't fit into my boxes, it's nonsense. I'm like, they said it happened that way. The wisdom that you're so dedicated to was born out of a mystical experience, a non-rational experience, a dream.
There's 7 buckets, you know, Kabbalah, alchemy, witchcraft, all these Gnostic traditions, which I'm excited to hear the biggest illusions that we collectively hold around who these individuals were and what was happening at these times. We could go on for probably 100 hours and still not scratch the surface, as you know, you're doing your channel, and there's just so much there. But it's a gift to be able to sit down with somebody who's dedicated their life to these studies. So maybe the first one could be our understanding of Mary as a reformed prostitute. Who was Mary? Through the Gnostic text and reading all that you have read, and we can go from there.
A lot, right? I mean, sort of what kind of unites. I feel like I'm going crazy because it doesn't feel terribly united. I feel like my brain's being pulled in all these wild directions. It's like Gnosticism Monday, then Hermeticism Tuesday, and you know, Gospel of Mary Magdalene on Wednesday. It's sort of, I sometimes refer to as intellectual, spiritual whiplash that I had to experience. But what groups them is, at least in the by the teacher that I learned from, Professor Bob Huntergraph, Professor at the University of Amsterdam, as he said, what brings them all together is they've all been rejected. Like they rejected knowledge. And what does it for us to say not just rejected, but suppressed? They tell stories that have made us uncomfortable, that have made institutions uncomfortable, and we've hidden. They're hidden. They become a cult. They become hidden. They become esoteric. They're things that only a small group of people are ever talking about. So that's sort of what unifies the field of Western esotericism and what I work on. And so we get everything from alchemy, magic, astrology, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, which I think that they don't seem at first talk to each other. Gnosticism doesn't have anything to do really with medieval alchemy. They're not talking, and Gnostics were long since extinct by the time that medieval alchemists were doing their thing. But what unifies them is that in the West, we've rejected them, and we put them all on the waistband of history, or we think we have, and yet they continue to have this profound effect just under the surface of the history that we want to tell. And Newton being one of the great examples, right? Is he the first of the scientists or the last of the sorcerers? Well, the answer is yes. The answer is yes.
Is the suppression of this exploration what has kind of been causing indignation on your end to keep on studying them?
Distort history through the kind of funhouse mirror of we want history to be a certain way. And the truth of the matter is it's never going to be a certain way. It's a mess. History is just going to it's a titanic mess because it's all about us and we're a mess. And it's what makes me worried is, we have this story we say, all right, we should, if you don't learn from the past, you're gonna repeat it. That's true. And we're in dangerous waters right now. We're in a meaning crisis. The world's boiling over with all kinds of violent political philosophies that are turning increasingly toward violence. There's atomic weapons out there. I mean, the world's if you look at the history of the world, we're living on the knife's edge of God knows what. And I think if we're going to study history, we got to study it in its entirety. Because it's in those rejected things where the kind of unconscious world of the Western imagination lie. And I think, to credit Jung, right, if we don't get at those unconscious things, we're going to be victims of them. So I think we just need to study this stuff. It doesn't mean that, when I go study the text of alchemy, it doesn't mean that I want to go be a medieval alchemist, or I study the occult philosophy of Agrippa. It's not like I'm out there trying to channel the powers of Mercury or something, although if someone wants to do that, all power to them. But what it means is that this is an important part of the trajectory of Western spirituality, Western philosophy, and Western culture, period. Like full stop. They need to be included in the story. So that's part of how I approach it. And it's they're rejected, and yet they're playing a disproportionately important part of how the West. And I think that's a dangerous place to. Right? We do have the question of Mary Magdalene. We don't know anything about Mary Magdalene. What we do know is this whole idea that she was thought of as a sex worker. It turns out that's just Pope Gregory just said that. He just took all the Marys that weren't Mary, the mother of Jesus, and just conflated them all. And I guess you can do that when you're the Pope or whatever. But that whole idea that Mary Magdalene was a sex worker doesn't appear in the way that it happened in the Western Church. But clearly the Jesus movement, sort of prior to what we would now recognize as Christianity, the Jesus movement had important women in it. And these women are playing some kind of substantial role in the development of the movement. And it seems like Mary Magdalene was part of that, and apparently an important part, so much so that after the early Jesus movement sort of evolves into Christianity, there's still stories about secret teachings being given by Jesus to Mary Magdalene over and against the other apostles, especially Peter. And so we have a text like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where Jesus, and that's clearly shaped at the emerging sort of proto-Catholic Church, who's really, upon this rock, Peter, you will found the church. Clearly, this group of Christians are like, yeah, not that. These secret teachings. So it's a fascinating book, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Now, is it late? Does it really represent actual teachings that Jesus gave to Mary Magdalene? I'm skeptical of that. Probably not. Who knows? But what does matter is that some early Christians felt it important enough to write it down. And we can kind of think of it as somewhere between revelation and fan fiction. A lot of of these gospels, including the 4 gospels that are in the Bible, many of them are written, all of them are written decades after Jesus is out of the picture. So at some level, it doesn't matter whether it really happened or not. What really matters is, for those communities, this text was an important touchstone on what they thought Christianity could and should be. And again, whether you're a Catholic or probably similar was true as well.
If you were to speculate, you know, when you look at the Magdalene caves, I believe in the south of France, and some of the texts found in the Nagano Library, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel, who she could have been, if not a sex worker, and for the Magdalene manuscripts and many different teachings pointing to her being, and women in general playing a much bigger role in Jesus' life and at the time.
Certainly after Jesus' death, there's a power vacuum and there's a push for authority. Who's going to be the authentic representatives of this? And of course, they also believe the world was about that Jesus clearly thought that the world was going to end in his lifetime. I think he was quite he died before it did. And we see this in Paul too. Paul says things like, some of you will not taste death. You're not going to die. You're going to, specifically, was probably a relatively high up woman in the church, may have been a widow, may have been not otherwise detached from the system of relations that would have otherwise kept her in a home. We do know that Migdal was a town. It just means, the word tower just means tower. Migdal just means tower. Miriam HaMigdal means the one from the town with the tower. So we know that it was a relatively poor village. So probably she wasn't of means. I don't think she was wealthy, because that village doesn't really show much wealth. It wasn't like a big Roman town like Tiberias or something. And clearly she was important enough that the Gospels couldn't write her out. And everyone knew her. Everyone knew the stories about her. So she must have been important. Now, was she secretly Jesus' wife, or she goes off south of France? I don't know. I think that's where you get into the world where there's the evidence becomes extremely shaky, and I'm doubtful of that personally. And also, I think Jesus was celibate. We know other Jewish sects at the time who also were pretty confident that the world was about to end. And tried to force it. He lost terribly. And so I think that celibacy was the order of the day because they were basically preparing to be purified and then be transformed into angels or something. We see that kind of language in Paul. We see it in these scenes too. There's some kind of transformations that happen in the world. But I don't see evidence of Jesus being married to her. But again, but also it's again the kind of thing where if that story is meaningful to people, which I think it is meaningful to many people, the idea of sort of a higher scandalous, I think it's the kind of thing that can't live at the level of evidence because we don't have much evidence, but it can live at the level of mythology. And I think that's an important place where it can live. And I think again we need to reclaim the power of myth to say, no,
On a high level, how much of early religion is really decided by who won the fight?
all of it. All of it. I mean, once religions get wrapped up into state power, once they get wrapped up into armies, I mean, Christianity begins as a pacifistic religion. They get the state army, they become the official the official religion of Rome. Now things are going to change. So I think that when religion aspires to political power, they basically decide after they've wiped out, who's going to win and lose. I mean, I think about, for instance, rabbinical Judaism, the tradition I come from. It wasn't because of anything other than they were the last one standing. The Essenes got wiped out, Sadducees got wiped out. The Jesus movement ultimately no longer considered themselves Jewish and went off and become another thing. The rabbis were just the last one standing, and they had the kind of spiritual technology that allowed them to survive in the aftermath of the temple. It's historical law. I think it's historical law. And so I think that we should, anytime that we're looking at the history of religion and not thinking about some kind of power analysis, we're only getting one side of the story. I think of many medieval mystics. Hildegard, the church loves her. She's on good graces with the church. Other mystics, not so much, right? And they burn them. So it really all depends on how you align yourself with power, what kind of prestige you have,
Yeah, the phone is recording the other phone, which is recording the iPad and the frame. And then you helped me set up OBS on the PC and my MacBook.
Valentines were very important.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Which is all alternative history of what happens if Valentinus becomes the Bishop of Rome. Maybe the Catholic Church looks very different, who knows?
Would you like a little drink?
Their opponents named them that. And sometimes I think we should just call, like, we should rebrand the Catholic Church as Petronism. It's Peterism. Or Paulism.
I kind of smoked like 7 or 8 or 9 of these cigarettes while you were asleep, but I'm gonna be the one that gets them next time.
We get to know these people by the names by which they're eradicated. And I feel like it's a total disservice to these people who just saw themselves as Christians. And we should say the Valentinians were just Christians for whom the God they really thought was important in terms of his teachings of Valentinus. And you know, ditto, like, you guys are Irenaeans. You're following Irenaeans.
Wandering star.
But again, the victors
For
of the
whom
that's the story. And that's the story that gets told. So fast forwarding, local spirits, people's connection with nature, suppression of the feminine, widespread theme. How would you give a bird's eye view of the suppression of the feminine leading up to the witch trials? Like, from your understanding in your readings, what was actually happening at those times and who was being persecuted? We can tell from the architecture of things. Was more comfortable with syncretism than we ought to admit. Syncretism being the syncretism that Christianity and other pagan elements were sitting much more comfortable on that side, especially in folk religion. And we know this because bishops complain about it, but they don't really do a lot about it because these are really popular. I mean, these are the people that you can't dance around that maple anymore. That's pagan. Sure we can. Make us. And so Christianity for a long time it did not rule by the stick. It enjoyed it suffered, I don't know what the right word is. It had a lot of syncretism. And there are moments where you can see in some of these preaching up there from there's those churches that have
Australia is using 3D printers to save coral reef. Isn't that exciting?
That's really cool. The average person, if they're a member of the religion or recent converts, they're like, the Lord and Jesus, they're going to fight the bad guys at the end of time, right? So it's Book of Revelation or Ragnarok, it's all the same. Yeah, so Ragnarok and Revelation is all the same. Because if you're a folk person, you can't read, you're just like, oh yeah, at the end of time, there's going to be a big battle between good and evil. We know the story. We already have the story. So there's a lot of syncretism going on here. The prophets are constantly talking about, like, quit worshiping this goddess Asherah. Stop. And that means people were. They were perfectly in hope, but the prohibition tells us that with practice. When there's prohibition, that's an indicator of practice. So religions typically exist through syncretism. The idea that religions are monoliths is really a thing that lives only in the imagination. Mayan Catholic interacts with Catholicism. It's an interesting combination of Catholicism and that leads up to the witch trials. Is that there's a guy named Johannes Nider, and Nider is a well-connected bishop.
1255.
And he's beginning to get stories from all over various kinds of strange things. And what he does, he puts all of the stories together and says, hold on, they're all part of the same heretical movement. It's not that part of this witchcraft, magic, or is a sin. Sins are fine. You can get sins forgiven. What you can't get forgiven is heresy. Once you've committed yourself to heresy, you're excommunicated and you can be subject to all kinds of things. What happens is that Nider and eventually Kramer these are two bishops, inquisitorial bishops. They're going to take all these stories and generate basically a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory is the world's about to end. It's always about to end. The world's about to end, and the devil is doing the last big push to outrage God. And the new outrage is there's a new heretical sect. And the heretical sect is led by women who meet in the forest, get naked, fly around, make men's penises disappear. So, of course, the most important thing is dudes' penises. I'm serious. You look at all these manuals. That's the one thing.
That's what they're
They're like all the things. They're like, yeah, they make our penises disappear. It's terrible.
It's like
This is the most like it's the most Freudian like castration anxiety thing ever.
it's like a horrible indie film.
It's just like the magical vanishing penises. Or whether magic they cause hail and stuff. And the idea is that all of this is now one new heresy, and you can extract this heresy through torture. And the book that really sets us all off is a book called Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of the Witches, and it was written by a psychopath. I mean, the guy that wrote Hammer of the Witches, Kramer, or H.T. Torber, this is his Latin name. He was so crazy. He was sexually infatuated with a couple of women. It's always a sort of weird Ted Bundy type guys that end up in this stuff. But he was so infatuated with a woman, he kept putting her on trial for witchcraft over and over again, that the local bishop was like, you have to go away. Like, you have to leave. Like, you're just like, when the Inquisition tells you that you're being too much, like, you're out of control. So what does he do? He's like an incel kind of guy, right? He's violent, and he hates women, and he goes off and he writes this book, and this book becomes a bestseller, and he writes it right at the time printing is coming online. So what is effectively a screed, because of printing becomes all the rage, and this really initiates the witch hunts. And the modern data says that between 40 and 60,000 people, mostly women.
Over what time period? 300 years?
Yeah, so it's about beginning about 1450, ending. Some of the witch trials we've won in the 18th century, and executions in Switzerland go all the way into the early 18th century, but most of the killing is finished by the late 17th century.
Mainly happening where in Europe?
All over, from Iceland to Russia. So you have the big killings typically happen in places like Scotland and Germany, which is also the areas where you have a lot of religious strife, where Catholics and Protestants are really at each other's throats, literally. And typically that's a pretty good predictor for when you have big outbreaks. But it's a feedback loop, right? I go to a village and say, is anything bad happening here? And the answer is yes, because it's 1580, and like you're living in the Ice Age, and